Good morning. Good morning to everyone joining us for the first episode of my new podcast, Intelligence Applied, where we are going to grapple with all that is human about AI. And I thought it would be fitting as my first guest to have my son, Spencer Cowley, on the line. Spencer is a creator in his own right, both a writer and a musician. And when we are talking about AI, we are really talking about what's going to be different or disrupted in our very human right now world that is quickly turning very inhumane, according to some. So today, Spencer and I are going to grapple with some of the big challenges we have being a Gen X mom and a millennial son. And we will see where we come out on the other side. So Spencer, welcome to the Applied Intelligence podcast. Spencer, welcome to Intelligence Applied. Could you introduce yourself to my guests?
Yeah, thanks, Mom. My name is Spencer Cowley. I'm 28, so I'm kind of on the edge of Gen Z and millennial, kind of depending on who you talk to about it. But I'm the kind of person who grew up with, a lot of the tech that we have today. Like I got a smartphone kind of like as I was going into, middle school, high school, I think. And I had like the iPods and everything before that, but then I also grew up with like older cousins who were, children of like the late 80s and 90s. So I kind of am in that like cusp region with a lot of tech. And so I think with AI, I found myself as LLMs have kind of come out and everything. I've been a bit like resistant to it in a way, kind of like clinging to, the older part of my brain that has been kind of like, as somebody who really loves art and music and creativity and considers themselves a very creative person, like I really cling to, the human side of that, like not believing that AI should take any part in that. But at the same time as, the younger side of my brain, somebody who works in marketing and is a copywriter and has worked with a lot of different kinds of businesses when I do writing professionally, I can see some of the benefit of LLMs and AI overall. And so it's kind of a tough conversation where, there's so many concerns that I have, but I also see so many benefits. So I guess that will kind of set the tone for our conversation, but a little bit more background on me. I currently, like I said, I'm a copywriter at a pharmaceutical ad agency. So that's kind of my day job. But then I also make ambient experimental electronic music as an artist named Melted Form. And I also write a newsletter on Substack that is kind of focused around music, especially that genre of music. And I've been doing that for about a year and a half now. And I've grown that to around 650 subscribers, which is pretty cool, completely organically. And so I've been kind of entered into this big community of musicians, like especially independent musicians and small labels and artists. And that community is very anti-AI for the most part. So it's kind of this weird, night and day experience of like, the day job is very like they push AI on you. Like all the agencies, they really try to leverage
Use AI
AI
or
however
die,
they
right?
can. Yep, exactly. Whereas in my creative side of my life, it's kind of like this is the devil. Like AI art is not art, that sort of thing. So yeah, I kind of find myself in the middle a lot of the time. But maybe we can just start there.
Yeah, it's fascinating. One of the biggest points of pushback that I get on my content on social media is around the concept of people using AI to support writing books. And as you know, I'm a writer. I've written books long before, the era of AI, and it's a special part of my identity. And to see these like slaying comments on my TikToks that say things like, you shouldn't be pushing people to write a book using AI. Like, how dare you? I always feel a little torn inside. And at the same time, as you know, the reason I do what I do, which centers around literacy, whether it is health literacy or data literacy and now AI literacy, it all comes back to giving people agency. And I have this concept, this feeling within me that says, how dare we gatekeep the ability to do something like put your ideas, your work out into the world, because maybe you're not a good book writer, but what if you had like the answer to world peace and you didn't know how to articulate that, but AI could help you do that? Like, who are these trolls online to say you don't get to use a tool that would help you put a book out into the world? Of course, I'm also a big fan of disclosing the use of AI, but I want to start with that concept of agency and maybe that tension that you brought up, which is, if I think about you and who you are, you didn't grow up playing instruments. You know very little music theory, and yet you still create. What gave you the permission to start anyway? Like, where did you find that agency?
I think I think a big part of that equation was I've always been somebody who has believed, from a very early age that I had um, it's not like a talent thing. I always believed that I just had this drive within me to be creative. Like I was always like writing little stories or feeling very inspired by the things I was consuming. Like I'm a huge movie buff and like I've always listened to music and that sort of thing. And so I always have tried out things here and there. Like even when I was young, like you bought me a bass at one point and I tried to play bass guitar, but I never like really got into it. Or I tried to play the drums, never really got into it. And I've done that with so many different things. At one point, I thought I wanted to be a video game developer because I loved video games growing up.
ID
Um,
Tech Camps, plug for them. I
yeah,
remember that summer
exactly.
very well.
Yeah, like I did summer camps to go and like, make my own little mobile app. So I feel like when you try so many different things, you realize like even if you don't stick with it because maybe it doesn't really feel as like, as it doesn't fit fully with you for some reason or another, like you still go, oh, like I tried and like I still kind of did something, so I can try something else. And so with music, I've always just loved listening to music and talking about music. Like I've always been the person to like always be sharing a new song with my friends or a playlist, that sort of thing. And then I just remember in college at one point, my friend had been taking like a piano class as some like elective just to get some final credits for his degree. And so he had this old Casio keyboard that was like his sister's that had, tape on the keys that showed all the chords and everything.
Right.
And so I just started like messing around with that. And I was just kind of playing like one finger at a time because I don't really I'm not talented enough with my fingers to do anything. I wasn't trained to do piano or anything. But then I realized as I was playing with these different digital synthetic sounds and just doing one key at a time, I was like, "Oh, this is touching a part of my brain that feels so familiar because it's like
Mhm.
these like movie soundtracks or like classical music like coming back, so many things that I was exposed to growing up. And then I realized like, I could make this kind of music and also like I actually kind of like this kind of music, like very chill, very simple, ambient, electronic, that kind of thing. And so at the time I had also newly had a MacBook, and so I had like GarageBand, as everybody does. And I was like, let me just try like, pressing some keys and seeing what happens, just recording some basic loops. It's super easy to do that, super intuitive. And that's one of the magic parts of tech is different programs continue to evolve to make things more and more intuitive, more and more seamless for people who don't have the technical knowledge to typically do something. Now it's like you just hit a single button and you can do it, better than you ever thought you could. And so I think that's kind of like when something clicked for me is I realized, all right, if I just start putting time into, playing around with this and not having any real goal or any real like urgency, eventually like something cool will happen. And it did. Like I realized I could start recording stuff with my iPhone and putting that into my computer and messing around with different effects that were just already built into the program, and something really cool would happen. I would stretch out sounds and I would like manipulate them, and I didn't know at all what I was doing. Like I didn't understand how any of these things worked. I didn't know what a lot of them meant, but it's just like it's kind of like stumbling through the dark, and eventually you find a light switch, and then the light flicks on. And then once you have some of that light, you're like, wait, I think I see something over there. And you stumble around over there, and then you find another light switch. And so it kind of felt like that. And that is like my favorite kind of experience, is just kind of like stumbling through the dark until you find something. And so I've continued to do that, not just with music, but like starting a newsletter and stuff, you know? Like I
Yeah.
didn't know a lot of people in the music community. I didn't know a lot about the music industry as a whole, and I've just kind of learned as I've gone along. And you know, it's just so cool that like that community will kind of embrace new voices and be willing to bring you in and teach you stuff. So I mean, yeah, that's how people learn, is you just have to start doing it.
Well, I think you're hitting on something really important, which it's the concept of curiosity, right? Um, Ever since you were little, you were always um, a fan of all things. So if you were into sports, you weren't into one sport. You loved all the sports. You watched all the sports. You weren't into one genre of movie only. You liked all the movies. You've explored into a genre of music that is, it's a special pocket of music, which I also think is fascinating because it does have that sort of soothing effect. And we have a lot of folks in our life that deal with anxiety and depression, and to have something like that almost feels like a helper, right? To be able to create something that's helpful and useful. But it is that curiosity, I think, that endures. And I think that's one of the power skills in the age of AI. But you said something that really fascinates me, and you even touched on it in your opening. And it's this idea that you're actually creating in a space where technology is almost essential. You've got mixers, you've got, they're mastering devices, all, I don't know all the technical terms, right? But, and then you just talked about tech, and I find it so fascinating. So for me, in my work, whether it was in life science and healthcare and clinical research, or whether it's now in my sort of my later era of data, et cetera, one constant theme persists as one concept, and that is tech, data, and AI. They're all kind of one part of one whole. And it's interesting to me to hear you almost separate out tech from AI and data, even though, so tech in your community is seen as a helper and essential, but AI is pushed wildly back against. What do you think creates that dissonance? Do you think that your generation or the communities that you're in just don't see AI as the next evolution of tech? They see it as something completely separate?
I think it is separate, to me at least, and I think it is to a lot of people. And I think that part of it is there's never been, it's kind of the next big leap, but it
Yeah.
feels separate because it is its own, like the fact that it has its own intelligence in a way, obviously like it's trained on all the data that we're feeding it. But I think that it's totally different from a tool in the way that general intelligence is going to be from narrow intelligence. So, we can talk about a specific AI tool that we've trained to do one thing. You
Mm,
hear about that a lot. Like that's what we mostly know today. Most of the AI powered whatever that you see online are trained to do a certain thing really well. Whereas we're potentially heading towards this, new future where there is an artificial general intelligence that works like a human. It can learn for itself and teach itself and do everything that a human can do essentially, but potentially even better. And like to, I think a lot of people, that is really scary.
mm,
And I think part of that is that the way when you're making music and you have a compressor or you have a reverb plugin or any of these other little tools, they are those narrow things that do one thing really well,
yeah.
and they perform a specific function. But then you get generative AI that makes music, that makes a track, and you hear it and you're like, huh, this sounds pretty similar to music that a human could make. But then if you know that it's not made by a human, and it's not even just knowing too, like sometimes when you hear it, it like doesn't fully sound, you know, as you expect it to or something. There's
Right.
a certain like hollow nature to it. But it kind of like hits you in a way of like, oh my gosh, wait, no, humans are the cool ones who can like create amazing music.
Yeah.
Music and art are like human products, like they're something that only we can make because they're a reflection of our souls. And so I talked about this in one of my newsletters. There's this book called Art and the Age of Artifice, I think it's called, by J.F. Martel. And there's a film critic that I really love named Thomas Flight on YouTube. And he referenced this in one of his pieces, which is what inspired me to research it. And well, basically, the author of the book talks about how there's kind of two categories of things. There's art and there's
Mm.
artifice. And artifice, it doesn't mean that it's bad. It could be anything from like a street sign to a booklet explaining a tool to yeah, anything like that. It's kind of anything that serves a function in society, but
Yeah.
the difference from that and art is that art, according to the author, is basically something that is bearing witness to, I'm kind of paraphrasing him, bearing witness to like the bafflement of our human existence. So, like, every human struggles with and tries to cope with and tries to come to terms with the idea that we exist in this crazy world and we have this consciousness that seems to separate us from everything else.
Right.
And we make art to kind of deal with that because we pour out our emotions, we pour out all of our thoughts, like all of that coping and trying to come to terms with this weird experience of existing
Living.
is
Yeah.
poured into our art. And so when we see this machine that can kind of think for itself in a way, and it's trained on all of our art, try to then reproduce something, we get this subconscious response of like, hey, like you don't have that actual, experience of dealing
Right.
with existence that we know of at least. And so I think we take a lot of ownership of like, no, art is our thing, like music is our thing. And
Mm.
so that's where I think a lot of the struggle and the dissonance comes from when people are really into art and that sort of thing, and they really believe in the human spirit and creativity and like what it actually means. I think we just see anything that is called AI art that's generative like that as kind of fraudulent because it feels like it's just regurgitating
Yeah.
jumbled up versions of what we've made, and it's not actually genuinely coming from this experience of like dealing with like human consciousness as we know it. So I think that's kind of where it's coming from.
Yeah, it sounds to me like, to a certain extent, what you're naming here is artists, or of all shapes and sizes. So not, when we say artists, I think a lot of people think in a very specific lane, a painter or something, but artists as a whole, um, they see their art as a way of expressing our humanity. And if art is created, or something that, and I know you're very anti calling any AI generated or even augmented art, but if it comes from another source, then it's not um, capable yet, hopefully, of expressing humanity because it doesn't have the lived experience of humans. And yet, in theory, it does have the lived experience of humans because it has all of that data from our lived experience. So we're essentially saying, look, it can't really be art because humans haven't created it, but it is a derivative product of our creations. And that's a very like tricky line. When you think about it, what is really concerning me right now is, because it's such a polarizing subject, it's really hard to discern where humanity and AI coming together is going to be a really good thing. And I get very concerned that people are pulling away from, like, there are certain categories of people. The categories of people I really love, like artists, like writers, musicians, creators. There's a subset of those people who have pulled dramatically away from AI, or almost, I wouldn't even say AI pessimists. There's a bigger word for it. It's almost like AI abolitionists or something like that. Because seeing that part of humanity pull away, to me, pulls their agency and their contributions out of the picture, like by saying, essentially, I'm taking my toys and going home. And I know that's, I don't want it to come across as, unkind. That's not what I mean, but it's sort of like, hey, I'm not going to participate in this. That is agency and choice and action. And I believe people should have agency to do whatever they think is best. But it makes me really sad that some of the best parts of us and some of our smartest and most creative people are pulling out of contributing to an ecosystem that could, if shaped by creatives and makers in the hands of brilliant and human focused people, that is what will continue to essentially allow the tech overlords to be the overlords, and we'll end up with a couple of different classes of people. And I know we're going to get into this a little bit later, but I want to talk about how AI might create sort of different classes, because that's equality and equity is a huge topic for both you and I in our lives, and the people we serve in our work. Because every day on the front lines of working in medicine, we see people who are disenfranchised and don't have access and don't have agency and don't have equity and don't have literacy, all the things, right? And so AI could make that much better, or it could make it worse. So I want to talk about that in a minute. But before I do, I want to go down the path of what's actually potentially happening here, and maybe why people are feeling so stressed out. I'm seeing two camps emerge, and I talk about this a little bit in my book. Camp one is people who are like, AI's here, just deal with it. It's going to happen to us. And then I see the people who are like, what we just talked about. Absolutely not. I don't want AI. It's going to ruin the world. We're all going to die. It's going to take over the world. Don't touch that thing with a 10-foot pole. And they're abdicating. So both of those groups to me are edges of extremes that are not super healthy. And we have a lot of extremes that are not super healthy in the world right now. What do you think about that? Like, how do you think we come back to a middling on this? Or do you think, no, we shouldn't? Because one of the things that's happening a ton is this fear mongering. You're going to lose your jobs. AI is going to blow up the world. There are some realities here. I mean, it's highly likely that 60+% of the jobs, and I can't remember who said it, I'll throw it in the show notes, 65% of the jobs that exist today in 10 years even will not exist. Yeah. And there'll be a whole new, including mine, yeah. A whole new category of jobs. And so I feel like we have this opportunity. Either we figure out how to stay curious, get in here and be part of the solution, or we're part of the problem, because either we're promoting fear mongering about AI and we're terrifying people, or we are being Pollyanna about it. Like, oh, it's wonderful. It's great. It's going to do amazing things. It's going to cure disease. Like, I believe it could potentially cure disease. I also believe it could create the disease that eradicates the human race. So yeah. I'm sort of like, where do we find the middle here? So what do you think about that?
Well, so I think a lot of the discourse does, like you said, it reflects the world that we already live in. We talked a little bit before this about the idea of, like, the world we live in is inequitable for the most part. We live in a world where there's vast wealth inequality, unequal access to healthcare, to resources, et cetera, et cetera. I think it really starts with the fact of the companies who are developing AI and have been developing it for the last decade or so. They have done it largely within a wall. They've done it in private. You hear a lot about people building things in public these days. That's very popular. And I love that, because I love transparency. And I think that
Yeah.
transparency is so important. And we don't get that right now from the government. We don't get it from these AI companies. And I think that that is like a really, it's really going to detract from people's willingness to get on board, not just get on board, but, like actually be willing to hear out, the nuance
Yeah.
and discuss it because it's kind of like, oh, look, suddenly all these AI tools exist that can make these memes that look like The Simpsons and they can make these things that look like this. And guess what? Like, for the most part, they got trained on all these things, but we had no idea that they were getting trained on them. And
Yeah.
the creators whose work went into training those tools, they didn't, give any consent, or if they did, they didn't realize it because, I mean, who's checking the terms and conditions of things, et cetera, et cetera. But I think that's something that really frustrates everyone is kind of like, it's already here and we didn't realize that all this was happening. And it's like, if you had just asked me 5 years ago if I wanted to consent to maybe putting in stuff, and I was going to be compensated for it in some way, maybe I would have been more, willing to do that. But now it's kind of like the train has left the station and
Mm.
people are like, all right, you said screw us, so we'll say screw you. And I think that is one of like the big missteps that all these companies have collectively taken,
Yeah.
is just not being transparent from the start. And I don't know if I see a lot of transparency happening in the future. I mean, there's like Anthropic who has come out on like 60 Minutes and stuff and been like, our whole thing is transparency. Anytime we talk about any
We've
issues
got
that we
vending
do it
machines that
publicly.
have gone wrong. Yeah,
Right,
exactly.
exactly. But it's like even that, it's like it's hard to trust a little bit, just because we know like that there's more going on for the most part. And like at the end of the day, you and I have had a whole discussion about this. I think that the capitalist society that we live in kind of, um, it forces a company's hand. They are always going to be in pursuit of greater profits, whether they are a private company or a publicly traded company. They're always trying to one up their competitors. They're always trying to make more money, and they're always trying to do the next big thing. And because of that, it is not in their best interest to be transparent. It is not in their best
Right.
interest to build in public, et cetera, that sort of thing.
That's why patient data has been sold for years without patients getting a piece of it, for example, or
Exactly.
even access to their own data, right?
It's why we live in a world that is not only an attention economy, but like you said, like it's a data economy where everything about us is being sold to the highest bidder because people are trying to sell us things. That's why I've gotten off of social media for the most part because I just like I kind of had this moment when I was like on Instagram at one point, just seeing all these targeted ads. I'm like, nah, these know way too much about me. Like I'm seeing them too often. Like this machine is built to just keep me glued to my phone and buying stuff, and it works. It works on so many people, and I'm not saying
Yeah, it
that like
works on me.
yeah, it does.
Like I
Yeah,
have a window of time every morning in my scroll that I'm served ads and I
yeah.
buy a lot of the time in that window. So now I get more ads in that window of time.
No,
Like,
yeah, I know people who straight up say that they like enjoy the targeted ads because they're just like it knows what I want and like I'm so glad that I found this product that I can then buy. But then it's like, how much benefit do you actually get out of these like little
yeah, you
niche
trading.
things? And yeah, it's just I think that is one of the big frustrations for me, and it's why like I'm trying to now um, learn a lot more about alternative ways that we can start to enact more like socialist policies. I don't want to get like super political about it, but I do think that that is
Yeah,
one of
don't
the
turn into
big,
grandpa just on the
yeah.
other end.
That's one of the big issues though. Is just that I think that there are no incentives for the optimist view to actually come into being for me. That's what really worries me. Um,
Well, what you're
yeah.
talking about here, Spencer, is these complex, interwoven, intersectional topics that leave people feeling stuck. I definitely find myself in that same boat a lot. In that Let's use your social media example. As you know, I went off of Facebook a few years back as well, and I did it because a certain loved one in our life had gotten sort of into the MAGA movement and conspiracy there. And I know our family's not alone. A lot of families have been ripped apart by our current political landscape. And it's a hard thing, but to continue to love people in my life, I had to not associate their social media with the person that I knew, grew up with, loved, was friends with, was raised by, whatever the case may be, right? And at the same time, if I am going to empower and teach people health literacy, data literacy, and AI literacy, I have to engage in the attention economy, the place where people are. I have a better chance of helping people by educating them through a TikTok reel than I do in many other normal ways of being, which I don't love that because, as we've talked about, like, first of all, any of these products, you hear it all the time, right? If you're not paying for the product, you are the product. And that is 100% true. And people don't know what they're trading. And that concerns me. And so a big part of why I do what I do is I need people who are not given access and agency to be gifted that, not because I'm some savior who can gift something. I'm not trying to say, hey, let me teach you, let me train you because I know all the things. I'm saying, like, hey, here's a life jacket because we're on a boat that is going down together. And I need you and your humanity and your purpose and yourself and every good thing you bring to the world alongside me in that next path. And I don't think it's fair or right to allow people, and we're in an age of like mass misinformation. We're in an age of just absolutely sort of people in these broad categories bulked together. And it's that, I think, is partly what's destroying our humanity. Even before AI did, you can almost see the cycle of events happening, right? And so sort of on the back of that, I want to get really deep here for a minute. I want to talk about three things you and I have talked about, three things in the news that we've talked about. You and I often exchange text messages with little clips of things. And you sent me a 60 minutes from the character AI story that came out, which is a heartbreaking story. And for those of you who didn't see it, Character AI is an AI, obviously, company that people can have, digital AI friends, for lack of a better word, on, and chatbots, exactly. And they have been known to become nefarious, to, do bad things with children, like over-sexualize them. And children and adults have taken their life as a result of relationships they're having with these characters. In response, I sent you Tristan Harris's on the Diary of a CEO podcast. And he is essentially saying, we've got 2 years and to like get this sorted before we're all essentially, going to be gone. He essentially talks about the race to AGI and this concept of the power being concentrated in the hands of the tech companies and all the stuff that you just said. Some people even call it birthing a digital god. Others say, like, let's light the fire and see what happens. Nobody really knows what's going to happen next. And then you and I both, a year ago talked about this other story that was on 60 Minutes about, it was called Human in the Loop, which, I found very ironic and funny. And I'm sure that's what the producers aimed. But it was all about the exploitation of labor. I think it was Kenya, right? If I'm not incorrect.
Yeah.
But I know it's happening in lots of other places in the world where essentially we are paying people to be on the front lines of sorting through horrific images, to moderate our social media and make sure the rest of us don't see things like beheadings or, child pornography. We are asking humans to classify data day in and day out. And we're paying them a non-living wage to do it.
Like $2 an hour, I think it equated to.
Something ridiculous. And so we've got so I just said, like, I want us to find our way forward together. And then you hear all of these things. And what scares me is that's what cripples people. That when you hear this again and again, like the people who are making these podcasts or episodes or whatever, they are sounding a real set of alarm bells that we do need to be paying attention to. And at the same time, as humans, we can only take so much before we're just like, I give up. It's too much. Like I can't control any of this. And the one kernel of thing I'm trying to get us to hold on to is yes, you can. You can control some of this. You do have the agency, or you should take the agency. And I will just, in the forward of my book, I talk a little bit about the inheritance that my parents have given me. As you know, I don't have a university degree. We didn't have a lot of money. I didn't have really that opportunity. Or at least I didn't feel the agency that I had that opportunity to somehow go figure out how to afford school. And I felt sort of responsible as the oldest child to go into the workforce and try and help my family. But the one thing that I went into the workforce with was this like inalienable belief that my intelligence was equal to anyone else's, no matter their training or pedigree. And that also that like practical curiosity that Granny gave me, that, like with, the Uncle Levi story, and I touch on this in the book too. Like he had this old coffee mug. He planted a grapefruit seed in it. It's a little chipped mug with some dirt. Granny didn't say, make sure the soil conditions are right. She just let him plant that seed. Like that's that practical, like just go do it. And I want to find a way to help people find their own inheritance like that. Like we have the knowledge, all our knowledge is equal. We have the ability to just do something. But that, to a certain extent, also glosses over all of those other hard things that we just talked about. And so how do we find that balance? I would love your perspective, because I've gotten very jaded. Us Gen Xers are very jaded people in general. We're like, just go do the thing, right? We didn't have a lot of the cool technologies that you guys have, and we didn't grow up with that. And that is also very interesting to me. I realized like technology got birthed into my life long after I lived a big part of my life. You were born into technology. It just happened to you. Whether you liked it or not, it was part of your human experience from the time you were little, from the time you would make yourself a bottle and turn on the PlayStation at 2. So technology was a thing for you.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't even know where I'm going here, but pick up on that thread and let's talk about some of this hard stuff.
Well, I think that like part of it is it's something we also experience politically. It's like the flood the zone kind of thing, where there's so many different things, and it's like the choice fatigue of like what do I focus on? I don't know what to pay attention to, because there are so many things that I'm seeing that it creates inertia where you just
Yes.
stay sitting down because you're just like, I don't know what to start with. But I think, and we see this in so many different aspects of life, it truly like that the rule of inertia is once you get into motion, you will stay in motion. And so it's like you just have to pick one thing, no matter what. Just pick one thing that is really bugging you and do something small. An example for that from my experience with like music is Spotify versus other streaming services.
Yeah.
So there's been such a huge industry pushback against Spotify specifically as a streaming service and as a company because of a variety of different issues. They pay artists like bottom of the barrel, like fraction of a cent, which like most of the streaming services do, but it's kind of like one of the worst of the worst.
Yeah.
And not only
Careful,
that,
our
but
podcast is going on Spotify.
well, I know, yeah. But no, it's true.
Kidding.
Like that's just one of the issues, though. It's not even just that. It's they've also deliberately flooded their service with AI generated content, music, to pull streams away from real artists because then they don't have to pay out as much money. And also like the way that they kind of like dole out money, it's like your fraction of like the total streams on the whole service. It's not like you get this many streams, you make this much money, really.
Yeah.
So it's kind of weird. So they've been able to dilute it and kind of not pay out as much money. But then on top of that, their CEO is investing in like AI powered weapons and things like that. And so
I'll have
there's
to
all
fact check you
these.
on that. I haven't heard that part yet.
Yes, yeah, Daniel Ek. He's had a lot of questionable investments that people do not agree with, and a lot of artists and bands have pulled their music off of the service. I'm in the process of doing it myself, and it kind of just like all these issues compounded to the point that people kind of were like, "Goodbye, Spotify. Like we're not using you anymore."
Yeah.
And I recently posted on my newsletter this end of year like favorite albums list, and I made a playlist on Apple Music, which is the service that I use. And somebody kind of commented and was like, are you taking like a moral high ground that you're using an Apple service versus Spotify? Like, how are they any better? And I'm like, I kind of responded and I was like, yeah, honestly, like Apple also has a lot of questionable issues around them, especially
Yep.
with like labor and that sort of thing. At the end of the day, they're a much larger tech company that makes a lot of things other than streaming, which Spotify is just a streaming service. So for me, it was like, I can easily get off of Spotify. I don't have to use Spotify. I can say
Yeah.
bye to them. I don't need them. And I hope to eventually do the same with Apple Music. I hope to eventually not use streaming services at all. But it's like, start with one. I know in my heart that I don't like Spotify, and they have too many issues that I cannot fix. But I can simply not pay them any of my money. I cannot use them. I cannot put playlists on their service to give to other people to encourage them to use it. That's a really easy
I
win
think
for
that's really
me.
practical because, you hear people talk about like, how do you boycott? There's so many things to boycott. How do you pick? And you're right. It's about starting with one that you have deep conviction about because at the end of the day, we probably all should be, blocking Amazon. Chick-fil-A's got questionable practices. Hobby Lobby. I mean, I'm listing the maybe the liberal boycott agenda versus the conservative one, but at the end of the day, we do have to take action and put our money in a capitalist society, put our money where our mouth is, because it is one of the few ways to change. That's why we have, we shop in local small businesses when we can. It's why we, it's why we try to be really deliberate about some of the things that we do out here in the world because every choice that we make does have an impact. But if we make a choice, if we wait to make even one choice, we're just going to be in that inertia that you were talking about, right? How do you move forward?
Well, that's like one of the issues too, is just like it's really hard to be an ethical consumer under capitalism.
Yeah,
Like we've heard that phrase, like there is no ethical consumption under capitalism.
yeah,
But I don't necessarily believe that that is entirely true because I do believe you can support the mom and pop shops. You can support certain companies that do everything they can to benefit society and not just line their own pockets. There are plenty of companies like that out there, but we are as a species are just like when we have convenience access to something that is convenient to us, we're almost always going to take that option.
that's
It's
behavioral
why,
economics
yeah,
101.
it's why Amazon is as big as it is. How can you beat one day shipping on any item you could ever dream of? Um, and
Right.
and it's the same with all the tech giants. They are simplifying and streamlining things in our lives that it feels hard to detach from those things. But then I've seen this big push in the music industry, and not like, musicians themselves, but people who are consuming music. People are realizing they're going back to like old iPods. They're going back to old MP3 players. They're going back to CD players. They're going back to vinyl records. There's
Yeah.
this huge analog push because people are realizing, hey, I've been using all these streaming services, but I know in my heart that the artists that I'm listening to, they're not being supported really by me using this service. And also, like, I have millions of songs I could listen to, but I really only listen to a slice of that, a really small slice. We only listen to so much music. And if you can actually invest in collecting music, if you can start to buy CDs, thrift CDs, that sort of thing, and then you spend time listening to a whole album, you spend time with your small collection, you actually feel a lot like you it's very enjoyable. At least I find it really enjoyable to just know, like, I really love this album. I love that I can like look at this physical piece of media, this CD, and like look at the liner notes and put it in my player and listen to it for an hour.
Right.
It really connects you more to the art and to the artist who made it. And you also know, hey, I paid $10 and the artist, got eight of those $10 or whatever. And so it's the same with digital media. It doesn't have to be physical. Bandcamp, for example, all these other e-commerce platforms where artists are directly selling to you. That's actually the best way to support those artists, is buying their digital media, because it lets you own the media files in high quality, and it gives them the highest margin of profit. So not to get, I know I'm getting like really deep into the music side of things, but I do think that's just one really good example of like, there are ways to use your money and direct your time and your effort into supporting other people that you care about, and not, falling victim to the convenience trap, which ends up just lining the pockets of CEOs of these big companies who make so much more than the average worker who is, at that
Well,
company.
let's pick up on that thread, because to me, this is one of the great promises of AI, if we can pull it off. And that is, like, if you take money out of the equation, like, you and I live a life of extreme privilege by comparison to a large percentage of the world.
Absolutely.
And
Yeah.
I carry that privilege heavily, but also with a sense of accountability that it's my responsibility to make sure that everyone has that. And um, I can't undo years and years of systemic inequality and all the things that this world has been built on, especially in the society that we live in today. But what I can do is I can try and level the playing field by finding ways to flip the script and give people something that is like power that they've never had before. So to a certain extent, AI still requires some privilege to use, right? If you don't have a smartphone or access to Wi-Fi or all of those things, then you don't have AI. But AI still can democratize numerous things for people. And so I love that conceptually. I don't love it at the cost of some of the harms, right? I think it's so important that we hold the harms and the goods side by side, and we consistently ask ourselves whether or not what we're doing is ethical. So I got huge pushback on a TikTok reel that I did over Christmas about using AI to create your own wrapping paper. Okay, it was literally, I was doing like this 12 days of Christmas. Here's a fun way to figure out how to use AI. And my purpose with that video wasn't actually to train people to start cranking out AI images, at the cost of the water usage that it takes to crank that stuff out, right? People call that stuff AI slop. My purpose of that video was to take the average mom who's at home and trying to make magic for her family and give her a tiny, tiny, tiny building block for accessing AI that might feel big and technical and not comfortable to her, and to allow her to go and say, like, oh, I can make wrapping paper, a picture for wrapping paper of our family dog in pajamas that's going to bring magic and light to my family. But in figuring out how to use AI to do that, she now cracks the tiniest door open to using AI to do bigger and more important and better things. And so I'm looking for those little light switches for people. And I don't think those light switches are being exploited enough to flip that script, to take that exploitation of people by the tech companies, et cetera, and turn it around. We have an incredible amount of power as humans. And when I say, hey, AI could help us, find the cure for cancer, I'm I'm not kidding. Like,
Yeah,
but I
absolutely.
do believe that if we're going to, you know that training a single large language model can emit as much carbon as 5 cars over their entire lifetimes, or data centers that run our AI, require this enormous amount of energy and water, that we have to be judicious about how we're doing it. But I don't think people talk about the fact that sometimes when it seems like a dumb or silly or wasteful thing that we're doing, printing wrapping paper, created by AI, is absolutely seems like a stupid thing. But they're not seeing it as that light switch that might take that mom who actually was a bench scientist before she decided to step out of the workforce, because that's the way our world works. Unfortunately, women often take the step back in the household in their career. And she always had this idea in her mind, and she's not using AI because she's been raising kids and she's just deciding, do I get back into the workforce? And she made wrapping paper this Christmas, but that got her curious enough about AI that now she's starting to do, play with some of her theories about protein structures and human biology again. And then she decides she's going to get into a lab and she's going to play around with things, and AI is going to assist her. And boom, she's the one who finds the cure for cancer. So to me, that is the story arc that I don't think people are seeing, in the same way that I don't think that they realize that some of these choices, like, I'm going to stream Netflix for hours, and trust me, I will. Stranger Things final episode tonight, right?
Yeah.
I will stream Netflix for hours right now until AI truly scales. That has more impact on our climate than most people's AI use does. That doesn't mean as AI scales, it's not going to far outpace and create harm to the climate. We have to be eyes wide open on these things. But let's talk for a second about the optimistic pieces of this, because you talked about how, musicians are going back to that analog. And I love that concept. There's something so comforting, especially for me, who grew up in an only analog world for so many years of my life, to go back to that. I think it's one of the reasons, I joke about Stranger Things, but I think one of the reasons that series has hit is because it brings people a level of nostalgia back to that analog days, the days of riding your bikes around the neighborhood with your friends and stuff that your generation really didn't get to do. The same, and your sister certainly doesn't get to do. I made a choice early on to allow you guys to use technology, whatever that technology of your day was, early. And often at the angst of many other parents, like, why are you letting your kids do it? And, you know, I've had a lot of battles with parents and friends about whether that was the right choice. I have to ask you, as my son, was that the right choice? And where do you see the optimistic silver linings here? So where did you get empowerment out of that? And what do you see as the positives that could come out of AI?
So I do think that you made the right choice with us for the most part.
One of a
I
few.
do, I do, I do think that like it's hard because I don't know that it's necessarily the right choice for everyone. I think
Yeah.
that it is a case by case basis. I think that the way my sister Rachel and I already, were with tech and everything, like I think that by our nature, we were pretty responsible with it
Yeah.
overall. And I do think, that actually I got a lot of that experience of like running around the neighborhood with friends and stuff, like
Yeah.
spending time outside. But we were definitely kind of the last generation, it feels like, that
Well,
truly
your
got
little
that.
sister doesn't have that at all, really.
Right, exactly. And then that makes me really sad. But so I do think that um, parents, I'm not a parent myself, but I do think that if parents make that decision, as long as they are there to help guide their kids, I think that introducing technology is not necessarily a bad thing. However, I think it has grown increasingly more difficult to fully be there to guide your kid and protect them from some of the dangers of what technology can bring.
Yeah.
Specifically, things like that character AI, there are so many of those like chatbots and things, and I have a really hard time trusting any of them. I just think that they can be incredibly unpredictable, and I think that kids need to spend more time talking to their fellow kids
Yeah.
and to actual people than they do chatbots. I think it's really dangerous to start relying on socialization with somebody who is not with an AI chatbot.
Okay, but let
Um,
me challenge you here for a second on
yeah.
that.
Hmm.
One of the reasons kids do that is we are in an age of loneliness for kids. And some of that is, a lot of that is the result of the digital world that we live in. But there are kids who are so disenfranchised from their peers that they're looking for anything to hold on to. And I think that's so sad, and we should be addressing that, the loneliness crisis. But the flip side of that, I just want to take it to an older generation. I think about someone who, and I heard a great story, it was probably on NPR, about a man who had lost his spouse, and he's been given one of these little test AI robots. It's like an Alexa like device, that is his digital companion. And he essentially said, like, sometimes that's the only person I get to talk to, but I still sometimes get out and sometimes my kids visit and what have you. But it has been a bright spot in his life.
Yeah,
And so,
I'm not saying that chatbots are like bad, as a whole. And I do think that, adults can absolutely use them. And I don't even think that kids shouldn't use them at all. I just think that there there
well, there
really
has to be
needs to be
parental
so
oversight.
many there needs to be so many safeguards, and there just aren't. There just aren't
Yeah,
right
that's
now.
fair. That's
Like
fair.
in my opinion, like the entire conversation, if there's a 10-year-old or a 13-year-old kid talking to a chatbot, like the parent better be able to go on their own phone and see that whole conversation as it's happening. Because like it's like talking to a potential predator online. Like you
Agree.
never know like what we know that AI hallucinates. We know that sometimes it does things that are unexpected because we don't fully understand how it works, like what its goals are, that sort of thing. It gets things wrong because it is a sycophant, because that's how it's trained to be. So I'm not saying that, like I know you asked me about the positives of AI, so I'm not trying to be too negative. I
No,
just
it's
think
okay.
that this is a good example of like where I think it's dangerous to not be very wary of this situation,
That's right.
because there are kids' lives at stake and their mental well-being. I do think that there are plenty of people, kids and adults alike, who struggle with loneliness these days and with depression and anxiety and all those things. And I think that the in my opinion, we need to be pushing those people, not pushing them, but we need to be encouraging those people, giving them a safe space around other humans to
Yeah.
socialize, to, like go out and like do a craft with other people or something like that. Like go to a communal space. Or if that's too much, then, do something from the comfort of your home, but still be like on a Discord chat where like your cameras are off, but you're still chatting, but there's other humans and you're
Yeah.
talking about comics you like or anime or whatever. Like there are so many ways to encourage human socialization before we have to resort to here's your chat bot. It kind of feels like sending a kid to a timeout corner and being like, just go talk to your little robot friend. It will like
Yeah.
fix your problems. So that's my honest opinion of it.
No,
But
I look, I think I do want to get to the positives, but I want to say you just opened up something for me, and I really appreciate that. So it's fascinating because of course I struggle with this as a parent to your youngest sibling, because she is on her devices pretty much 24/7. Now, we have great oversight. But that's where I was about to say, like, well, if parents just pay attention to what their kids do, and I say that all the time, but that's my privilege showing, isn't it? Because at the end of the day, I'm not a single parent who's working three job shifts. I have the ability to sit and monitor my child. I have the income that covers apps like Bark that allow me to see when self-harm is being mentioned, or her friends are cursing, or somebody might be, and I have, tools in place that block nefarious sites from popping up for her. And we've had lots of talks about that this year because she's into a genre, anime, that leans towards more adult subjects. It's also opened great conversation opportunities for me with her. But I'm making the assumption when I sit on my high horse as a parent, as a mom, and say, like, I've parented 3 kids and they're okay because I paid attention to their tech use. I have the privilege of paying attention to their tech use. So I fully agree with you that we need way more safeguards and oversight and, frankly, regulation. I'm terrified the world's not going to get there, though, and fast enough.
Yeah.
And that we're going to have all of these harms. And so for me, again, like, to use the life jacket example, I feel like my job is to literally just hand out life jackets left and right and be like, okay, parent over here who's making the wrapping paper, maybe this gives you a peek into what your kids are doing on their computers. Like, this is a hard, tricky subject. But I do want us to end on a positive note. And I also want to have some time to let you talk a little bit about your Substack, because it has a beautiful sense of humanity. And I get joy out of reading your articles every Friday. And you've exposed me to a new genre of music that as somebody who deeply loves jazz and somebody who really enjoys such a broad variety of genres, I had never entered my picture until then. So let's get back to, not to gloss
Yeah.
over all the hard stuff we talked about, but
Yeah. Yeah.
let's get back to some of the positives that you see in AI, because again, you do have to use it in work and maybe even in some of your personal pursuits. Like,
Absolutely.
where do you see the silver lining here, and what sort of is your parting thoughts for our audience here?
Well, I do want to go back to what you said about, that mom who she made the wrapping paper, but then it helped get her back into maybe exploring, biochemistry or whatever it was you were
Yeah.
talking about, like finding the cure for cancer. And I do genuinely believe that that is one of the silver linings, one of the real, like, things I'm optimistic about with AI is I do believe the processing power that it possesses and its ability to, start to work on its own to, like, do stuff as you direct it, is going to lead to some major breakthroughs. I have been thinking about, like, when we're talking about the issues with, like, resources, water consumption, climate, all that kind of stuff, I find that all really concerning, absolutely. I know that there's been some research that's come out that said, like, the actual energy usage is not really, it's relatively negligible for the most part, depending on what you're doing. But, like, there's so many things we do with tech that we don't think twice about, like streaming Netflix, like playing a console, whatever, that uses a lot more energy. I think water is a bigger issue. But I do think that if we know this comes at a cost, which it does, we better be using it for a good reason. And sure, like, maybe
Or to
we
solve
think,
those problems, right?
right, and maybe we think, maybe designing wrapping paper isn't necessarily the best use of it. But if I'm going to use it to try to build a tool or try to, you know, pursue a breakthrough or that sort of thing, like, I think that's worth, the it's worth the cost if we're actually start to seeing if we start to see results from it, which I know that there have already been major breakthroughs. There was another 60-minute story about this company that is making these brain implants that they go on top of, like, your motor cortex or whatever, and then they
Yeah.
connect to your spinal cord. And so people who have been paralyzed in the rest of their body, they are actually able to start walking again because they can actually think, and it will send signals to electrodes that stimulate their paralyzed limbs to move. And, like, they used AI to help get there. And so, like, that is, like, amazing. Like, why would we not want more of those kinds of things to happen?
Yeah.
So I do think, I think about my own AI usage, which I try not to use a lot because of all my concerns and everything. But then when, recently I've had this idea of this tool I want to build online, like an application that is going to help musicians and music journalists and labels and publicists, and hopefully it will like make a genuinely positive change in the music ecosystem.
Yeah.
And so if it means that I need to use AI for a little bit just to figure out how to bring that to life until I can work with maybe a real human software engineer to like then, take it further. I think that's worth the cost, especially if I'm, only using it lightly. So I think that's the kind of thing where, I that's where the nuance comes in, is I
Yeah.
think that you cannot detract from the real potential of these tools and of AI to genuinely change people's lives for the better. And at the same time, we've talked about all the potential negatives. So it's a balancing act, and it's really scary, but at the same time, it's really exciting. Um,
So
yeah.
I love that. You're right. It is scary. I think we're all a little scared right now, and I think that's maybe very, very healthy and very human, as long as we don't allow it to paralyze us completely. But I want to close by asking you one final question. Your newsletter sign off. It says, "Remember to listen to the hum, buzz, and hiss of the world around you. There's music to be heard there." And I want to just hear from you. Like, what does that mean to you? And what might it mean for all of us trying to stay human in systems designed to optimize us?
Yeah, so that is a quote that I kind of made up, but it's also heavily inspired by the philosopher Alan Watts, who people are probably familiar with. Like his philosophy is very much around, being content with existence. So it kind of goes back to what we started with like art and the idea of coming to terms with your own existence. And like ambient music, a lot of ambient music is setting a space for yourself. It's molding the space around you. It's a soundscape. It's an atmosphere, and Brian Eno, who's a famous ambient musician, he said, ambient music should be as ignorable as it is listenable, which means that you can put it on the background and you can do other stuff and like not even really notice it, but it just kind of like is there and it's setting a positive atmosphere for you. Or you can like really deeply listen to it and appreciate it and notice all these little details and nuances in it. That's one of the things that I love about ambient music. And I'm the kind of person who doesn't really ignore it a lot because I always am analyzing it. But so when I made that quote and like where the hum, buzz, and hiss came from was the fact that ambient music is a lot of it is noise, and how I've realized that I have this affinity for noise as music. And if you have ever heard about noise music, a lot of it is like it can be kind of harsh, like it's almost like static, that sort of thing. And you hear about brown noise and white noise and all those different things. I'm not necessarily just talking about that, but just all the little things. Like if you have your window open, what do you hear? You hear cars going by. It's very subtle noises of the engines that are maybe far away. You hear little birds in the distance. You hear the wind. You hear maybe like somebody's doorbell. You hear all these little things, and all of that is the hum, buzz, and hiss of the world. Alan Watts said something kind of like that, where he talks about listening to all of that. And when you have, when you deal with anxiety and that sort of thing, sometimes that stuff can get to you. Like you can start to really hyper focus on the little noises. But when you start to realize that all of that is the world together in harmony, just going about existing, it becomes this really beautiful backdrop for your life of like, oh my gosh, like I'm hearing music all the time. And it's not the music we think of. It's not a guitar, it's not a piano. It's just the noise of life, the general hum, buzz, and hiss of life. That is like really special to me. I just love the idea of like that we're always hearing music,
Mm,
because music is something that I think just like makes us feel really happy and human and like in touch with our emotions. Yeah, so I just like it's kind of almost like what's the word? It's the end of a meditation in a way.
yeah.
kind of just a reminder to my readers, like, oh, we just went through all these different albums of music and everything that I'm recommending to you. But don't forget, you're always listening to music. Don't forget to be in touch with that, and just remember that music is always around us. So, I think like I'm glad you brought up my newsletter and everything, because I really hope that it becomes this reminder for people that there are so many humans out there making amazing art and making amazing music. And we really just need to take that first step to find them and hear what they have to say. And that is oftentimes all you need to then feel like you can go and do something. Like, I want it to just be that inspiration and that reminder that, like, you can overcome your inertia that's holding you back because somebody else has done that. They've put out an album of music, they've put out an hour of music that they've made over many hours, days, months, weeks, etc. That is the most inspiring thing to me. And that is what makes me get up in the morning and feel like, you know what, I am going to go work on this tool today, and I might use AI. I am going to go and make music today with my keyboard. I am going to go and do something about something I believe in because other people can do it too. And the whole time there's that music that is, setting the tone for me.
It's a lovely, lovely reflection to end our conversation on. I think one of the things that I heard in your metaphor was, wouldn't it be beautiful if we could find a way to coexist with AI in that we could allow it to just exist in the background when it needs to, creating the efficiency and doing those good things for us. And when we want to, when we feel like dipping in and doing a jam session and really like turning the volume all the way up and creating with it, wouldn't it be beautiful if we all felt like we had the agency to keep AI in its place and allow us to stay as human as we not just want to be, but need to be as we move into this next era. Shameless plug for my new book coming out in January. It's all about staying human in the age of AI and claiming your agency. And I appreciate so much you spending all this time with your mom today on this podcast. I continue to learn from you and be inspired by you. I hope everyone checks out your newsletter on Substack. It's under Melted Form, Hum, Buzz, and Hiss, correct?
Yes.
And I'll make sure to drop Spencer's links and details in the show notes here. But thank you for listening to the first episode of our podcast. I hope to bring you many more compelling conversations like this throughout 2026. And with that, I will say, because it is New Year's Eve, Happy New Year's. Be well.
Happy New Year. Love you, Mom. Thank you.
Love you. All right, let me stop our recording.